So I lived under massive segregation. Like I went from like nerd, dork, geek to just like stud beast. Like everyone wanted to be my mate. The religion became so overwhelming and dominant that it really tore my whole life apart. Oh, it's great.
I thought it came out pretty good.
Yeah, it came out great. Oh, I love it. I was born Johannesburg, South Africa, 1973, in the heart of apartheid. I really lived through some interesting times. You know, growing up in South Africa, I was super sheltered. It was in the middle of apartheid, which was a completely white. I only grew up around white people, and all the people in my school were white, and the only time we ever saw any Africans, any blacks, were when they were the domestic workers or they lived, but they were completely segregated. So I lived under massive segregation and just a really racist regime.
Did you think it was wrong as a kid, or was it just so normal?
I didn't know. Yeah, it was completely normal. I had no idea actually until I immigrated in 1986 when I was 13. And I remember coming to America, and there was bumper stickers on people's cars that said "Free South Africa, End Apartheid," and I was like, "Well, what are people talking? What you talking about, Willis?"
You're like, "I'm free as hell."
I don't know what you're talking. What is? When I remember having judgment on those people who had those bumper stickers. I was, what are they? So that's how. As a child, you sheltered and you were kept sheltered. But my parents were very aware of the struggle and the political turmoil that was going on there. And thank my father for recognizing the plight of the country and in 1986 deciding to leave. And that was incredibly traumatic, very challenging, very difficult for my whole family. You uproot, you take your entire life and you lift it up and you move into a foreign country where you don't really know anybody. And
did you have any expectations of what America was before you got there?
Yeah, I was 13, and so you get your expectations, and you from movies and from videos and from what you think. So there's this giant fantasy of what life is in America. And I would come and I arrived, and the climate in San Diego was very different to South Africa. Had terrible allergies, so I remember arriving into school and just being just the new little skinny Jewish kid with snot running down his face, and that was kind of my first 2 years in America. And so I was not the most popular kid on campus, and it was hard. But my father never really sold his businesses in South Africa, and when I was in 11th grade, one of his businesses was having trouble, and he was like, "Oh, I need to go back and run it and manage it." And so I was invited to go back, and I really was not happy in America. High school was hard, and I was an outsider, and I still had a lot of friends in South Africa from when I'd immigrated. And
it hadn't been that long.
Hadn't been that long. I'd still had mates there, and so when they went back there to live, and I went back with them, and I was in 11th grade, and in South Africa you have to be 18 to drive, but in America you could be driving at 16. So I had my driver's license already. I went back to South Africa, and all of a sudden I was the king stud because I was this like 16 and a half year old kid driving a car, had my
they just accepted the American license.
We didn't really even ask. I had a driver's license. I had an international driver's license, and I got a car because I was going to school far away, and I was I went from like nerd, dork, geek to just like
reinvented
stud beast. Like everyone wanted to be my mate, and not just because I had a car, but also because I was like worldly, and I'd come from America, and I had an accent. I'd put on the twang, and it was great, man. I went to the American school in Johannesburg, and it was a world. It was an adventure.
You went to the American school?
Yeah, the American International School of Johannesburg.
You're like, I'm American now. I got to go here.
Well, because because the school system in South Africa is different than the school system in the United States. So I'd already gone back 6 months when I'd immigrated, and I didn't want to go back anymore. So I stayed on the U.S. system, and that school was on the U.S. system. It had a whole lot of. It had very, very wealthy kids. It had kids who were diplomats or very private wealthy schools. Everything was in US dollars, and it was a wild school. My graduating class had like 15 kids, and they all had issues. Everyone, every one of them, like they were all fucked up in some way. After college, I went back to live in South Africa for a minute, and then I went and traveled Europe, and I traveled Europe for about a year, and really, like in that process, there was this huge opening, right? I went from this very sort of narrow-minded, very linear thinker, to just an opening and an awakening. Found God in the Sinai Desert, in a moment of, just observing a palm tree and recognizing, and not even super high, I mean maybe a little bit high, but not super high. It wasn't. It was just a collection of experiences that led to that moment. I don't think it was that moment in particular there was anything special other than just this, like this landing of all things being one, all of me being interconnected to everything. I remember I did a diving course in the Red Sea and paying attention to all the, the ecosystem under the water, and how the fish ate on bigger fish, which fed on the corals, which there's just this entire ecosystem, and watching electrical storms over Saudi Arabia, and deep meditation for the first time in my life, and meeting people from all over the world, and recognizing that it didn't matter about the skin color or the religion, or that ultimately we all had very unique characteristics, but at the underlying all of it was, we're all kind of similar, and in that moment the penny dropped, the so-called penny dropped, this idea that there was a God, and that God was not something even outside of myself or even external, or was not this ethereal figure that existed with some old man sitting on a cloud, but really was, and it wasn't even, I didn't even call her God at that point.
They, them.
I didn't really call them God at that point. I really just called it the universe and spirit, and it was a deep awakening and a deep opening. And then from the, and with that awareness and that oneness, it was such a special time in my life. It was at that point, I think I was the most hippied out. I was, long hair and dreads and nose rings and
dreads.
No dreads. No dreads.
Had to call you out.
Yeah, no dreads. Dirty hair.
Dirty, unkempt.
Unkempt, dirty.
To say the
living
least.
with the Bedouins living with the Bedouins, and sleeping in the desert, and eating mush and gruel, and smoking tons of hashish, and just living my best life. It was an amazing time and space. From that point onward, I landed up, after that huge awakening and this idea that, oh my God, we're all one, we're all magic. Then I landed up straight after Sinai. I landed up going to Jerusalem and meeting a rabbi, and next thing you knew, I was sitting in yeshiva, Jewish seminary, and spent over 2 years deeply immersed in Judaism, and becoming incredibly orthodox and ultra religious. And so I went from this beautifully open, spiritual, all one, and took all that sort of spiritual energy that I had and concentrated it on an organized religion that gave me structure and focus and discipline and community and
roots
and connection, because obviously being Jewish, it was all familiar, and became exceedingly more and more religious till I became fervent and extreme, in my thinking, in my beliefs, in my behavior, in my judgment of others who were not living that life. It became so much. The religion became so overwhelming and dominant that it really tore my whole life apart.
Wow.
Tore me apart from my family and from my kids and from my wife, and so it was a journey. It was a journey.
What do you think brought you to that intensity, that level of dedication?
Yeah, in some ways I feel like I like to do things in totality. I think it's part of my personality, right? We tend to extremes in some regards, and so this was an extreme, and in some ways Judaism satisfied many needs for me. Orthodox. It was my first adventure in community. we fast forward 20 years and I'm back in community. I'm running a village and co-founded a village that I've been living here for 10 years and 11 years and building community and running it. And there's something inherent in my nature that really enjoys this idea of being part of something and being connected to a tribe and since I could never find it in business because I was always an entrepreneur and really always a solopreneur, really always corporate life never suited my personality. I think I've really resonated towards other community and getting my needs met through that. And so I think Judaism provided that, and I think the Emerald Village provides that, and helps me feel part of something that's bigger and brighter and more than just myself and my individual desires and in many like it's so funny because I always think of myself as moderate and the rest of the world as extreme, but don't we all? Really?
Yeah.
I always think of myself as I'm in the middle, but relative to the way that my thought process is and the way that the majority of the world I think thinks and behaves and acts and eats, and I definitely feel like I'm not part of that center. I definitely feel that I'm fringe, and whether that fringe is right or wrong, it's just my fringe, And that's why I think we're all unique. We're all unique, just like everybody else.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, pretty much done here. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh, nice. Oh, I love it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
I thought it came out pretty good.
Yeah, it came out great. Oh, I love it.